Yeah, I think the reason that CTV is just now beginning to be thought of as a performance channel is the history of television, right? If you think about kind of marketers used it for reach and kind of driving awareness, and that really is true. It does drive demand gen, and it increases the total audience that are going to be aware of a certain product. It's the best way to learn about a new product, right? It's the big screen. But historically, there hasn't been a lot of data, so you didn't know kind of necessarily what was working, where it was working. Now there's capabilities where you can actually connect this through to understand what really is driving the performance outcomes. And it's starting to come right up against kind of these kind of demand capture tools, right? Search, social, things that you use to really attribute kind of lower funnel outcomes. Now we're starting to come into conflict with CTV ad dollars, and we can actually attribute what really did drive those outcomes. And so it's a really exciting time in the industry overall.
Can you share any proof points of how you deliver those outcomes?
Yeah, so at Iris TV, we're turning TV shows and movies into what we call video level data. And we do that directly with partners like Whirl, who have these unbelievable emotional data sets where you actually know right after the, kind of before the ad break in those 2 minutes, what is that emotion? And this is just a really powerful signal. So we've seen kind of localized business. So this is true for telco, this is true for retail, this is true for QSR. Specifically, Carl's Jr. utilized the capabilities of geo-targeting and then kind of utilizing contextual around their stores to drive people in. And they actually saw that it drove higher foot traffic, higher levels of sales, and like over 2 times better ROAS than the norms on those campaigns. So it's become always on. And so we're seeing that get adopted by a lot of other advertisers. And this is happening in other mediums. So we saw an entertainment advertiser actually drive 20% higher tune-in for a big new show and release. And it was actually much cheaper than alternatives. Kind of, again, just ended up being the best performing data set, and that was national. Another example, like we saw a big champagne brand. They wanted to drive consideration. You have a lot of options when you're choosing at the checkout counter for champagne. So they actually were associating the brand with things like weddings, travel, emotions like anticipation or excitement, and that drove a 5 times improvement in consideration for the brand.
Field advertisers come in with their briefs and research. They know who they want to target. How does contextual now become so much more important for brands and their agency partners in executing CTV campaigns?
Yeah, if you think about any campaign, what matters, right? There's a ton of research that goes into creating the creative. And then you have a target that you're going after. And often kind of we think about that purely in terms of identity and audience terms. What's so cool about Iris and all of the partners that we work with is we're enabling privacy-first targeting. That's all real time. We know exactly what's being viewed, but we don't know who you are. So we know it's this emotion or it's an actual comedic moment. So that new Jennifer Coolidge ad is actually going to really land because it's funny, right? And people are going to remember the brand and actually think about it more favorably. So incorporating that into like an identity-based planning strategy is tricky, but it should be part of every plan. And the way that we do that is actually working with brand and agency partners and then helping them, whether it's analyze the brief or analyze their ad creative or actually tell them, based on your actual brand vertical, we know what is performing really well. And that kind of sets up the initial part of the campaign. And then you test and you figure out, by creative, by campaign, by brand, what works.
Field, you first talked about Iris ID a few years ago at another Beet event. At the time, the scale was small, but then there was a lot of promise, right? Where are you guys today with Iris ID? Yeah,
we've certainly gotten beat up on that point before as we were kind of launching. This is a new technology, right? So unlike matching against like a maid or a cookie or a household ID or an IP address, we actually had to create a new data signal. So we had to create Iris IDs for every TV show and movie. There's now over 90 million of them out there. We just announced the partnership with Tubi, which is really exciting. And this is why we're so excited about our partnership with Whirl. Whirl is really the backbone for so much of the free ad-supported streaming ecosystem. And they're powering so many great providers like FIFA, which is obviously going to be big this coming year. And so those kind of inventory partners that now we've enabled with the Iris ID has increased our coverage to over 40% of the CTV ecosystem. And now we're starting to get into live and live sports. We already have solutions available, but they're about to kind of become available on some of the biggest partners we think of when we think about live sports. So we're really excited about those capabilities in 2026.